This video was made possible by your support on Patreon. A few years ago, I went on a trip to Boston and visited the top floor of Massachusetts General Hospital, home to the Ether Dome, touted to be the site of the first anesthetized surgery. The hospital preserved the amphitheater, put some plaques and exhibits outside, and hung up this big painting of the aforementioned surgery on the wall. The star of this photo is William Morton, originally a dentist who found himself in the right place at the right time to get credit for the first modern use of anesthesia in surgery. Now, one of the themes I hope people take away from this channel is that great man history is pointless. Referring to one person as the inventor or the father of anything ignores the centuries of science that came before that person that enabled their legacy to exist in the first place. Morton was by no means the first guy to use a substance to take away pain, not by a long shot. So then what did he do? By the 1800s, the idea that a chemical could reduce pain had been around for a long time. Physicians had already been using alcohol and opium-based pain medication for millennia, and starting around 760, an Arabian alchemist started using sulfuric acid for pain relief, and in the 10th century, Persian scientist Al-Razi had used all kinds of topical, ingested, and inhaled substances before surgery. If we were looking for a strict first, it was probably Al-Razi. As chemistry became more scientific, a German scientist named Valerius Cortis started experimenting with sulfuric acid and alcohol, calling it sweet vitriol. Eventually, this substance was renamed sulfuric ether or sometimes ethyl ether. Fast forward 200 years, and an English surgeon named Matthew Turner recommended ether for headaches. He recommended mixing it in wine, but if you were in a pinch, you could always just snort it. So by the 1700s, we had an idea that ether had medical uses, but Western doctors were more fascinated by a popular party drug. At this time, nitrous oxide, or what you might know as laughing gas, was getting popular outside of medicine. Before anyone noticed that it took pain away, they realized that laughing gas and ether both got you high. People would inhale rags soaked in ether or suck on balloons full of nitrous oxide and have themselves a good old-fashioned ether frolic. These things might have been like a modern house party, but they were more popular as demonstrations by science professors. So one day in 1844, this one professor is doing a laughing gas demonstration, and one of the participants falls down and injures his leg really badly, or at least so everyone thought. Everyone gathered around him, and when he came to, he had zero pain. He was totally fine. And one of the men who saw that in person was a popular Boston-based dentist named Horace Wells, and he immediately made the connection between the man's nitrous oxide consumption and his lack of pain. See, surgery and dentistry were in a weird spot back then. Not only was there not yet anesthesia, but operations were done with brutal-looking 19th century technology, and the infections after surgery were frequent and lethal. And after witnessing laughing gas's potential to eliminate pain, Wells knew that he had the opportunity to use laughing gas in his dentist's office. So he volunteered as his own little proof of concept. He had a buddy give him a big hit of laughing gas and pull out his wisdom tooth. It was a success. Wells woke up with no pain, one less tooth, and ready to bring nitrous oxide into his practice. Over the course of the next few weeks, Wells gave laughing gas to 15 of his patients before deciding he was going to be the one that brought anesthetic surgery to the public, and he would do so on the biggest medical stage in the country, Harvard University. And it went terribly. He was originally scheduled to give laughing gas to a man getting a leg amputated, but for a few reasons that never happened. So instead, he stayed around to do a guest lecture, talked about all his success with the gas, and called on a volunteer student to go under and get a tooth pulled. Can you even imagine how bananas that is? Like, a guest lecturer comes into your college class, claims that this party drug will make pain go away, and then tries to pull out your tooth. This is bonkers to me. And it went about as bad as it could have. Wells removed the nitrous oxide a little too early, so his poor volunteer was screaming in agony as Wells yanked on his tooth. This very public failure ended up being a permanent scar on Wells's professional career. And not only did he not make it into the history books, but his own apprentice would take the exact title he was after. This is where William Morton finally comes into the story. By most accounts, Morton wasn't a super honest or noble dude. He tried his hand at some scammy business ventures as a young man, but decided to get into dentistry later in life for some more respectable money. It's not totally clear how he and Wells started working together, but by 1843, they had opened up a dentistry practice in Boston, but dissolved their partnership soon afterwards, so Morton could go to medical school at Harvard. While they had a pretty brief partnership, all things considered, they kept up on each other's work, which will be relevant in a minute. Now, Morton wasn't a particularly good student at Harvard, but he took classes by someone who would become hugely important and the last last character in our little trio here. Charles Jackson. Jackson was a badass. He started as a Harvard doctor, did some post-grad work in Paris, and was also randomly really into geology and chemistry. So when he moved back to America, he quit clinical medicine and opened a chemistry lab while also teaching at Harvard. And as was convention at the time, Jackson would end classes with a laughing gas demonstration. But one day, he didn't have any on hand, so he was like, I'll just use ether instead. We use both chemicals to get high in the same way, so let's try it on the students. What the heck were these professors doing back then? So Professor Jackson put some on a towel, had a student inhale, and the student passed out on the floor. Jackson, of course, panicked because he thought that he just killed a student, but fortunately, after a little while, the student woke up, much to Jackson's relief. Now, Jackson was more of an academic than a clinician, so he never did surgery under ether, but he talked about the substance all the time in his lectures. And one of the members of the audience listening to his lectures was a young William Morton. Morton knew that Wells used nitrous oxide during his failed surgical attempts, but after Jackson's lectures, ether's starting to look pretty good as an anesthesia candidate. Even better, because nobody had popularized it, he could come up with his own blend of ether, sell it, and make a fortune. So he did a basic literature review on the substance, then started experiments on his dog. And it worked. He started realizing that he was onto something huge. So the plan was to keep things as secret as possible before making a grand announcement and cashing in on the discovery. After a bit of animal experimentation, he tested ether on himself. He took a rag, dipped it in ether, breathed in, and saw if he lost consciousness for any amount of time. And it was a success again. Then he recruited 2 medical students for more human experimentation, this time with less success. Both participants got drowsy but didn't fully lose consciousness. Morton concluded that the regular ether you'd buy at the apothecary, the drugstores at the time, was too contaminated with alcohol. But remember, he had Professor Jackson, who was like a world expert on ether. Unfortunately for Morton, if he asked him for advice, he risked exposing his secret project. Then he had the problem of how to administer ether. The old rag method was clearly not very precise. So he had a friend make some custom glass pieces, which he fashioned into some of the first ether inhalers. He tested the purified ether on himself with the device, and again, success. He knocked himself out for 7 to 8 minutes, which was plenty of time for a tooth extraction. So for the next few weeks, he administered ether to his dental patients with varying degrees of success. And by the way, remember, this is all happening ridiculously quickly. Wells did his famous nitrous oxide demo in 1845. Morton went from idea to experiment to clinical application by the end of September of 1846. And now that Morton had some anecdotal evidence, he decided to shoot his shot. Morton got in touch with the head surgeon of Massachusetts General, John Warren, and was like, hey, so I've got this drug that puts you to sleep. Can't tell you what it is, but I know you've got some surgeries to do anyway. Can I come try to knock them out for you? And Warren was like, yeah, okay. Were there no lawyers back then? The Lucky Guinea Pig was a 21-year-old Bostonian named Edward Abbott who had come in for a vascular tumor in his neck. Basically a big jumble of varicose veins under his jaw and neck area. So Morton put him under, Warren sliced open his neck, removed the mass, sutured him up, and when Abbott woke up, he said that he felt no pain. That was October 16th of 1846, the day referred to as Ether Day. It was a supervised surgery with multiple doctors, a surgeon, and technically an anesthesiologist. This is why credit for anesthesia usually goes to Morton. Was it the first use of anesthetized surgery? No way. But Ether Day was an inflection point for anesthetized surgery on a global level. That day in 1846 marked the beginning of a paradigm shift. The reason we can't imagine surgery without anesthesia boils down to this day and the events that followed. This is where the story starts to get good. The surgeons at Massachusetts General knew that Morton was onto something, and knew they had a duty to spread the word if they had a substance that could alleviate suffering. But if Morton gave up his secret, he wouldn't be able to cash in on it. On one hand, if Morton tells everybody he just used purified ether, he risked losing money since that was an easy to replicate recipe. But if he didn't give up his secret, then he was a jerk. He decided to be a jerk. Morton added a little bit of orange scent to regular old ether and attempted to patent it as Letheon, named after a healing river in Greek mythology. Now, the other doctors suspected it was ether. They didn't know if he had added anything in or whatever the case was, but they had a hunch. So after a little bit of pressure and realizing he wasn't going to win this patent battle, battle, Morton revealed he was using common sulfuric ether on November 6th of 1846. But Morton still had the monopoly on those little inhaler devices. So realizing that ether was about to be everywhere, he took out a ton of money and rushed production on thousands of ether inhalers. If he couldn't charge for ether, at least he could charge for the device. After a few weeks, word of ether's discovery reached Europe, and by the end of the year, London-based surgeons and dentists started using ether in surgeries. One of them was a doctor named Robert Liston. I'll come back to him. Now, things seem like they're going great for Morton. Despite plenty of arguments from Jackson and Wells saying that they deserved credit for the ether discovery, plus a man named Crawford Long who said he did it 4 years earlier, Morton won. He got credit for the invention, and because he didn't win the patent battle and thus didn't get instantly rich, he got to brand himself as a selfless public benefactor. Literally, he titled his autobiography, Trials of a Public Benefactor. So by early 1847, Morton had shot his shot, but had hit an unintended target. He didn't cash in on the discovery of ether, but as long as ether was getting popular and his inhalers were being sold, he was making money. But that didn't last long. See, ether didn't smell good, so the medical community could easily entertain a different anesthetic. And about a year after Ether Day, a Scottish obstetrician named James Simpson introduced chloroform into surgery as an alternative. Soon after, most dentists and surgeons preferred chloroform as their anesthesia of choice. But Morton's financial death sentence came from the inhaler. As more clinicians adopted the inhaler, they realized a huge design flaw. The inhaler required the patient to breathe actively and deeply in order to lift a valve and allow oxygen into the inhaler. Not doing so would tend to drown them with ether, and it's hard to breathe deeply when the patient was unconscious. So on March 26th of 1847, Mason Warren, a friend of Morton's who worked at Massachusetts General, started using a sponge instead of an inhaler. The sponge almost instantly took over in doctors' offices over those fragile inhalers. This left Morton in financial ruin, but resulted in an explosion of suddenly accessible anesthetized surgery. All a doctor needed was a sponge and some ether or chloroform, and they could do painless surgeries. This is why Morton's work and Ether Day were big deals. One thing I hope you take away from my videos is that the widespread availability of a breakthrough is way more important than the breakthrough itself. One dude saying first in the attic of a hospital is one thing, but the ability to make limb amputation painless for thousands of people was the real benefit of all this. The rise in popularity of anesthesia made surgery more popular, which improved surgical skill, but also highlighted the missing piece of the puzzle. If we wanted to go deeper than surface-level surgery, we needed to do something about these infections. Luckily, just a few years after Ether Day, a handful of surgeons over in London would be uniquely poised to solve that puzzle, including Robert Liston, who I mentioned earlier. If you want to hear the story of how the invention of anesthesia led to the first antiseptic surgery, click on this video here. I'd like to give a huge thank you to my patrons on Patreon. Their support literally allowed me to fly out to Boston and film parts of this video, so if you'd like to join them, click here. Otherwise, you can support this channel for free by subscribing, liking the video, saying hi in the comments, or sharing. Have fun, be good, see you next time.